Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and we're getting started a little early this year with the old Halloween atmosphere. I know we're a little early, but I got my jack-o'-lantern out here. I got my little haunted house back there. Look at that. Got the lights out. We start the Halloween atmosphere a little early, and it makes sense because we're doing part 2 of my Asian horror playlist for 2016. Yes, we are exploring that year. As usual, we've plowed through most of the crap in part 1. So the titles we're discussing tonight in part 2 are better, in my opinion, than the movies that we covered in the last video. None of the films we're covering tonight are great films, so you may want to exercise some caution and only watch the ones that seem interesting to you. And remember, titles for all of the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. Our first 2 films tonight, I guess technically would receive a fail grade from me, but there's still a slight step up from what we covered in the last video. The first film is Corpse Party 2: Book of Shadows, Japanese horror film. Following the events of the first film, Corpse Party, high school students Naomi and Ayumi want to bring back their dead friends. Well, who wouldn't? In order to do so, they go back to the elementary school in an alternate dimension where the tragedy took place, but they become involved in a new incident. Her dead friends seem alive and well, but they all feel the discomfort of when they previously died. For example, one girl who was hung feels pain in her neck, and things go from there. Now, this is a film adaptation of a video game which I have not played. It begins fairly well, actually. There's a ghost of an elementary school girl who disembowels one of the teenagers with a pair of scissors. And that's a good start to the film, folks. It's a good start. Actresses Rina Ikoma and Nozomi Maeda return in the lead roles, and if someone had to return to lead this film from the prior film, I would prefer the girls, because at least they're somewhat likable despite their general weak acting ability. Unfortunately, most of the guys return as well in supporting roles, and they're even worse than the ladies in this. This is not a franchise to watch for compelling performances, that's for sure. Again, the lighting is bland here for being an alternate dimension horror film. Like, if you're making a horror film, right, that's set in an alternate dimension, play with the lighting a bit, play with the sets a bit. Even if it's a low budget, you can usually do something interesting. Make it colorful at the very least. I mean, I've seen low budget Italian horror films that were made for really cheap, but they still have that crazy lighting at times, right? Alternate dimension gives you an excuse to not be realistic, so you don't have to worry about the lighting being realistic in a film like this. Take advantage of that freedom, but they do not do that here for the most part. They fail to kind of take advantage of that. No effort really is put into the set designs in these Corpse Party films for the purposes of comparison, all right? I know some of these films have budgetary constraints, right? But check out the Gakko no Kaiden films from the 1990s. And there was 4 theatrical films called The Haunted School, or Gakko no Kaiden films from Japan. They deal with elementary school kids, but most of the films, at least the first 3, they're trapped inside a school. And there's some interesting lighting and atmosphere and set designs and stuff like that in there. And those films didn't have huge budgets. So I think in 2016, you got to put a little bit more effort into the ambiance here. Now, on the positive side, there is some entertainment value to be had when the psycho killer girl shows up and taunts her victims, mostly because she uses physical violence against them. There's a pretty good eye extraction scene. It's over pretty quickly, and the ending is kind of creepy, so there is some positives to this. The pacing is decent. The film does drag at times because the content in between the violence is just not very interesting. But the violence is pretty good. Another problem in this is that there's really no sense of urgency to this film. Some of the films that I covered in part 1 had serious problems with this. This one has not as serious of a problem, but it's still kind of a problem. And, between the violence, there's no long-lasting sense of dread. It's not, it's not that compelling, I guess. It only really comes alive during the scenes of horror. But that's not really enough here. Really, if you want to make a film like this work, you have to make it interesting in between the violence, or kind of add tension to crescendo to the violence. But it doesn't really do that. The death scenes just kind of come and go as they please. No proper setup or craftsmanship really to the film that much. But with all of that said, I can see how some people might like this one. There are some slasher-style films that are worse than this, for sure. There are films that are worse than this. So if you decide to watch it, just go in with modest expectations. These are not high priorities. Oh, I forgot to fire up my DVD availability here. Let me fire that up for you. My memory states that this is available only on Region 2 DVD without subtitles. Takes a little while for my Excel files to blow up. Yes, Region 2 DVD, no subs. All right, let's move on. Second film tonight, kind of like the same level as the first one. And that is The Doll from Indonesia. Anya and Daniel just moved to their new house in Bandung. Daniel brings home a doll from his workplace. Anya, who is a doll maker, welcomes the doll happily to their house. They later learn that the doll belonged to a little girl who died with her family. Then strange things begin to happen, like the doll mysteriously moving places. What's really happening here? Now, do not confuse this film with the Mongolian horror film called Doll from 2015, which I reviewed earlier in this playlist. Now, the director of this film is a man by the name of Rocky Soraya, who has made some entertaining horror films. I enjoyed both of his Third Eye movies, which I reviewed in a separate video on my channel. Sabrina was also pretty good. So this guy isn't a bad director. But I do think that these doll films, and there's at least 2 of them currently, and I think there's a 3rd one in post-production as we speak. I think the doll films are kind of his weakest efforts, but they're not awful or anything. The movie at the beginning rushes right into its premise. It doesn't even bother to set it up, really. I can appreciate fast pacing, but this is a bit too fast. The doll appears and starts doing creepy stuff within the opening 3 minutes of the film. It's kind of dumb too in how the characters react to it. Like, for example, this one girl, she's like a teenager, I think. She sees this creepy doll on her front doorstep of her house, and she just assumes that it's from a love interest. Like, okay, there's no letter on it or anything. So she brings it into her room and puts it on her bed. And then she looks out the window for a few seconds. Then she looks back on her bed, okay, and there's a note there. I think the doll is gone, mysteriously disappears, and there's a note on her bed saying, "Let's play hide and seek. Come and find me." Like, I would be freaked out at this point, right? But she shows little concern, just assumes that her brother did it. Like, what's with these assumptions, lady, And, she eventually throws out the doll when her brother denies, she figures there's something wrong. But the way she reacts to everything is very, nonchalant. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, okay, this doll could be possessed, I'll just throw it out. Or, I don't know what's going on here. So, yeah, it's very, rushed, very rushed opening. Then the story resets to drama mode, okay? And then it shifts its focus to the family that moves into a new house. The story overall is pretty average. You'll notice one of the actresses, the little girl from The Night Comes For Us, shows up in this, which is pretty cool. Nice to see her in something else. Very limited screen time, though, unfortunately. Scares during the opening half, kind of mediocre. You get some jump scares. You know how in horror films they have the jumping cat? Well, this one has a jumping mouse scare, which is really pretty lame. Nothing particularly creative or interesting early on that we haven't seen in other horror films. The doll, though, the actual doll itself, it's kind of creepy. It is. Things get better during the middle section. There's a pretty fun scare scene involving a ringing bell. There's another pretty fun scare scene involving a knife, and then another one with bats and a pair of scissors. So there are some entertaining moments in the film. So I would say overall, very mixed bag, but there's kind of a base level of entertainment value here. You know, I could see some people maybe enjoying this. But again, if you're going to go into these, for this director, Rocky Soraya, I would say, you know, check out the Third Eye films first. And then you could roll into these, and then like Sabrina. But yeah, it's not a high priority right now. Now this film, The Doll, is actually on Netflix in the United States. Alright, our next two films tonight, again, not bad, watchable films, and they're both from mainland China. Now the first one is strictly from the mainland. The second film here is kind of a mainland Hong Kong co-production. So the next film is called Mother's Revenge from China. After being abandoned on a snowy night, a mother of 4 freezes to death. Now luckily for her, a black cat entered her casket and transformed her into a Catwoman ghost. So yes, the spirit of this old woman returns for vengeance. Now our protagonists are the grown children of this woman, and they find themselves in danger and try to escape her wrath. Now one of her sons, however, suspects that the threat is a human one. A human threat in a mainland China horror film? That would never happen. So the film begins in a room full of paper dolls and decorations. The scene is decent, nothing special. There are some cheap jumps in this film as well, which I do not appreciate. I really wish, you know, overall, let's just ban jump scares for 5 years and make people do other stuff. Really. It's just, I've never been a fan of them. You know, at times they can work, but for the most part, they're just cheap. So we should get rid of them for 5 years and make everyone just try something else. But I do like the premise in this. This film has a good premise. The whole, like, cat-related element, pretty interesting. And it makes this feel different from some of the other Chinese horror films that I've seen, or the ones that are exported to international audiences. The plot is actually vaguely reminiscent of the Japanese classic Kuroneko, or The Black Cat. But the overall quality is not as good in this film. The villain, kind of cool looking, kind of creepy. Has like a monster face that's a blend of a cat and a human. I think that works. The horror elements do get better near the end of the film, primarily because the villain is more prominent in that section. The aesthetics are effective. It's especially true for the old architecture. Lots of decrepit bone stone and brick buildings here to enjoy. It's a nice atmosphere. There's also quite a bit of fog that's used, which adds to it. Acting is pretty good. You know, it's pretty good stuff. The very end of the film does have a decent dramatic impact, but nothing significant. So overall, again, a watchable film. Not good enough to be on someone's high priority list, but it's decent. Now this one, Mother's Revenge, I actually saw on YouTube, and I think it has English subtitles. Alright, our next film, again a China-Hong Kong co-production, Phantom of the Theater. Alright, and again we're doing 2016 still. A haunted theater filled with the vengeful spirits of a tragically trapped performance troupe that was murdered in a fire 13 years ago waits for a once grand palatial playhouse to reopen with a new show and bring in new victims. A film director sets his sights on the location to use for his debut film, but the cast and crew, of course, begin to experience horrific deaths. In this case, spontaneous combustion. Now this is set in Shanghai during the 1930s. Cool setting, alright? Very nicely shot, impressive set designs and lighting here. I like colorful horror films, and this definitely has some color to it. The characters are kind of well off financially, so we get some housing that's close to mansion level stuff here, which is cool. The theater itself is also visually impactful. It has like a traditional elegance to it despite being old. Now our main protagonists are the film director and the lead actress, okay? And these people are skeptical and actually do not believe in the supernatural, which may prove to be a mistake, depending on what happens here. Story blends in some elements of Phantom of the Opera to it, but it's not as dramatically impactful as it probably wants to be. It's not bad, but the characters are a little bit stiff, and none of the relationships are really that endearing. So when it tries to get melodramatic, it kind of has a minimal effect. Now, the final shot of the film does have a little bit of emotional resonance to it, to a degree, but it's not that significant, and the film lacks a certain energy to kind of take it to the next level. Simon Yam, one of my favorite actors, has a small supporting role as like a warlord father of the director character. There are some CGI effects, but they actually looked pretty decent in this one. They infused them pretty well. Not realistic, but pretty good. There's a ghost scene at the very beginning where the spirits like merge and float in the air. I like that visual. It can work for ghosts like this. There's a nightmare sequence where a woman is surrounded by faces, and we get some spontaneous combustion scenes. And a few of the hauntings that involve mirrors look pretty good as well. There's no like Japanese onryo style ghosts in this either, so you don't have to worry about that. But at the same time, none of the horror sequences are like classic or really impactful or memorable. So again, this is a film that is watchable. It's not terrible. It's watchable, but not a high priority. Availability on Phantom of the Theater is that it is on Amazon for streaming. All right, I think we're country hopping here. We're country hopping. We're going to Malaysia for our next title. And this one is called Munafik. Now, the opening scene is the aftermath of a car crash. A man is injured, but his wife dies. We then jump a while later, and we see that he is a Muslim medical practitioner who is unable to accept the fact that his wife is no longer in this world. Later on, he agrees to treat a depressed woman named Maria, but strange and unsettling things begin to happen. So this kind of has more of a melodramatic, emotional aspect to it near the beginning. The music kind of assists this. You get some weepy notes and tunes mixed in during some of the dialogue scenes. Maybe it goes a little too far in that regard, but it's not bad. A decent enough setup that it gets the viewer to sympathize with this lead character and his losses, so that is kind of important, but they do kind of milk the melodrama a bit too much. Overall, however, this feels more like a blend of a modern supernatural horror film with a splash of The Exorcist kind of mixed in. There's definitely a psychological impact to the main character, which is caused and exacerbated by these otherworldly beings. There's a potential crisis of faith, of course, which is a cliche in films of this kind. But it's handled well enough in this. Camera work and acting are pretty good. Good use of color at times. Scare tactics, again, we get some reliance on jump scares, which I personally just don't like it. There's a scene with a toy ball that goes kind of overboard in the jumps. But there's some other stuff that's pretty effective. You know, I like the creepy stuff, like the rocking chairs, the Exorcist-style possession scenes, stuff like that. So the horror content's kind of a mixed bag. It's all pretty conventional, but some of it does work okay. And even though this is from like an Islamic religious perspective, I feel like Munafik still feels conventional by international standards. But it's still pretty good. You know, it doesn't go as exotic, so to speak, for American audiences as something like the Turkish Dabe films. You know, I mean, those go real out there from an American perspective. It can maybe hold your attention better because it's a little bit more crazy. But yeah, Munafik's a little bit more conventional by international standards, but it's pretty good flick. And Munafik is on YouTube. It is on YouTube. All right, our final three films tonight are a step up here. I think they're a little bit of a step up. So let me know what you think if you've seen them or want to watch them. Fans of the Indonesian horror films or even the Raid films might be interested in checking out our next title, and that is Firegate. Gerbang Neraka, all right, from Indonesia. So the oldest pyramid in the world is found in Indonesia. A journalist, played by Julia Stell, must team up with an archaeologist and a shaman to uncover the mystery of the pyramid. When they find out that this ancient pyramid is a prison for a malevolent ancient demon, well, that can't be good, they must stop the demon from breaking out, or it's the end of the frickin' world as we know it. So yes, there are some recognizable names and faces that are attached to this. Julia Stell, Hammer Girl herself from the Raid 2, is our female lead. Always nice to see her in horror films. I became a fan of hers because of her earlier horror titles. The guy who plays the main baddie in the first Raid film also shows up in this near the beginning, but he gets limited screen time, unfortunately. And the director is Rizal Mantovani, a man we've covered a handful of times already in this playlist. He previously teamed up with Julia Stell when he directed his Kuntilanak trilogy from the 2000s, so this is a reunion of sorts for them. Now, in terms of Firegate, there's a creepy premonition scene early on involving fire and Armageddon. Pretty good way to start the film. There are a few jump scares, but they're usually a part of the actual death scenes, which makes them feel less cheap than if they're just like fake scares. The deaths themselves are short-lived but fairly violent, at least when compared to the typical supernatural horror film out there. The scares are kind of conventional, but some of the ghostly activity is stuff like a demon or a spirit who looks like half human, half beast, and it murders people in pretty graphic ways, like destroying their eyes while they're being killed, which is pretty cool. There is some atmosphere at times in the film as well. They enter the pyramid near the midpoint of the film. Then they kind of leave it for a while, and then they return. So we get a decent amount of time inside this pyramid, but not a lot of time. But the scenes inside of it are pretty good. And there's a showdown between the demon and one of the protagonists that is moderately entertaining down the stretch. Some of the CG imagery is a bit dodgy, maybe a little bit cheesy. And the ending does feel drawn out a little bit in terms of dialogue, but that's hard to determine because this film is not available anywhere with subtitles, unfortunately. So I saw it without subs, so it's kind of difficult to really make a final assessment of a film if there's a chunk of dialogue in there that could be important. So I hopefully this gets an English subtitled release soon, but I still enjoyed it. I think this is a pretty good flick. It's definitely probably the best film we've covered so far from 2016 in terms of entertainment value. And if you're a fan of Indonesian horror or the Raid films, you'll see some familiar faces. So I thought Firegate was pretty good. And it is available on YouTube, but without subtitles. Alright, our final two films here should be very familiar with you if you've followed this playlist. Alright, our final two films this evening are part of a lengthy franchise of documentary-style horror films. And the first film is Yami Douga 14, also known as Tokyo Videos of Horror 14. And this is a horror anthology. The intro of all these films goes something like this. In the modern cities where all the darkness is said to be gone, there still exists the darkness that is everlasting from the ancient times. The darkness of the dead that appears on the verge of this world. The underworld is always waiting for a chance to drag us down into the dark side. And there is another darkness that is still growing. Haven't you forgotten where the darkness grows most enormously? Yes, it grows within our distorted hearts. Sometimes the camera captures this darkness of such moments, the videos that are born from the darkness and are to be buried in the darkness. So let us introduce you to what the camera catches in the darkness, Yami Douga. So again, an anthology, 3 short films, total runtime of 56 minutes here. So the first story is called Mother-in-Law. You have a married couple, they have an argument over the woman's reliance on filming things in their house to cope with her psychological problems. The husband, also not a big fan of kids, doesn't even want children, and that's adding stress to their relationship. In any case, this footage shows the strange events that occur in their apartment. Remember, this is documentary style. And the conflict is front and center. And there's one scene with slightly dodgy CGI, but the money shot near the end is pretty effective. I liked it. Story 2. A friend's marriage. So you have a cameraman visits his buddy, and his buddy's about to get married in about a week. The friend starts, his buddy starts acting strange, asks the dude to wait a while he cleans up his apartment. So he's sitting in his apartment. The dude gets drunk and starts making some inappropriate comments about this guy's fiance. But he does have some reasons to say this. I was kind of warning this guy. And the conversation takes an unexpected turn that I did not quite see coming. This one's a little bit different from most of the stories in this franchise, but I like that. It works. It's a little creepy, and it has the best horror money shot of this trilogy. Pretty good. And then finally, we have Story 3, Death Circular Game. So 3 men scope out an abandoned school at night, and they film inside of it for kicks. One of them is rather knowledgeable about the alleged paranormal activity at their location, and they see some weird writing on a blackboard referencing a game. So this one has more holes and contrivances than the other films in this trilogy, or even the typical film in this franchise. The big one is this. For a found footage film, you need to know where they got the tape, or how they got the tape, or that the tape actually exists. In this film, I question whether or not an actual tape or a recording of this event could or did actually exist. Alright, so it's kind of a fundamental problem with kind of a found footage or documentary style theme here. So it kind of betrays that element to it. Because usually in these films, you'll have like an intro scene where someone presents the film. In this one, you don't get that. It's like, so how are we watching this film? Was it found somewhere? What's going on? But regardless, kind of interesting to think about though when you're watching the film. But still, it's a decent segment. Some of the plot holes might distract you, but it's watchable, and there's a certain disorientation that works. So Yami Douga 14, not the best installment of this franchise, but this movie is kind of a breath of fresh air compared to the garbage found footage stuff we covered in the last video, right? So this is, this whole franchise is actually pretty good. So Yami Douga 14, also known as Tokyo Videos of Horror 14, is available to rent on Amazon. I think that you can also buy these streaming on Amazon. And our final film of the evening, yes, is of course Yami Douga 15, also known as Tokyo Videos of Horror 15, another documentary-style anthology. So this is an anthology of 3 short horror films, total runtime of 51 minutes. First story is Revenge Agency, alright? There's a man who has some videos, refuses to tell the interviewer where he got them from because they involve illegal activities. So the video starts, we're watching 3 men who kidnap another man, and they proceed to beat the crap out of this guy with metal rods, and things go from there. Kind of like in the middle of a forest. And this segment seems like it's going to be nasty and dark, but the ending is kind of goofy, maybe you could call it that. But fortunately, it's very unique and unpredictable. And in that sense, I do recommend it. I did not see this ending coming, I can tell you that much. Story 2, entitled Where Is My Friend? A woman secretly records her interactions with a man who wants to hire her for his website. Now, this dude is the owner of an escort service, apparently, but he appears to be shady. So this girl records herself as she interviews him in his apartment, and things escalate. Pretty good flick, some creepy images, and then Story 3, To Catch a Ghost. 3 people are on the way to a psychic hotspot that allegedly had a woman confined to a room when the building was operational. It's a generic premise, but the execution is good here. The occultist girl, in particular, is aggressively trying to find this ghost, and you're kind of wondering why. And then you find out that she has an understandable motivation for this. There are a few brief CGI shots that are a bit dodgy, as I like to say, but there are also some effective scares. There's one with like a plastic sheet that's pretty effective. It's quite good. I liked Story 3. So Tokyo Videos of Horror 15 is a good installment. It's the last installment that was uploaded onto Amazon. And I know that they've made more of these because I've seen the trailers on YouTube. I mean, they've gone up to, I don't even know how high. But on Amazon, they're only $2 to rent each one. So they make for a pretty nice like marathon for an evening. Hopefully they upload more of these. If you're going to do a marathon of these, of like the first 15 of these parts, and you just want to pick like the best of the best, I would suggest part 12, which is my favorite, part 2, part 4, part 6, and part 13. So that'll give you a solid 5 to 6 hours of content if you want to do like a nighttime marathon. It'll only cost you like $12 to watch or $10 to watch 5 of them. So check these out if you want to. They're a pretty good example of kind of low budget Japanese horror films. So that concludes part 2 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2016. There are a few titles tonight you may want to seek out, depending on your tastes. I think Firegate may be interesting to some people, and the 2 Yami Douga films, which are kind of standouts tonight. And be sure to join me for part 3, because we'll crack into a batch of films that are all legitimately entertaining. And then after that, we'll get to part 4, which are my favorites of 2016. So lots more to cover, people. And as always, we will see you next time.